Hi, I'm Dr. Gaby Cora, and welcome to my show, Dr. Gaby's Take, Make Life Interesting. In 1995, I had just been a researcher at the National Institutes of Health for just about 2 weeks when a Hispanic network called us asking for an expert in depression for the National Depression Screening Day. Out of a very large group, I was probably the only one who spoke Spanish at the time. So they assumed that because I spoke Spanish, I was also an expert in the Hispanic culture. That was far from being truth. The first thing, though, that we think about cultures and diversity is if there is another language involved, communication and language are of essence. It's very important for us to be able to communicate, be able to understand, and not just assume that because we speak Spanish, we can communicate exactly the same way from one country to the next. Actually, we know very well that in Spain, there may be some use of words or constructions that may be quite different from the kinds of words that we would use in Colombia, or for example, in Argentina, or even in Cuba. So it's very important for us to be open-minded about what words to use. The fact that we all speak the same language doesn't mean that we are experts within the totality of the Hispanic group. The lessons learned from my experience include the first part, the communication, the language use. Now, it's true, I spoke Spanish. I speak Spanish fluently, particularly Argentine Spanish. However, it's very important to realize that Argentine Spanish can be very different from Spanish from Mexico, which is the one that we most widely use in the United States, and or Spanish as used in Puerto Rico or in Spain. So it's very important for us to realize that there may be some differences in pronunciation or even in the use of words. The second one is that in Spanish we tend to be lively in our conversations. In English we tend to be a little more formal and more serious. Last but not least, in Spanish we tend to have more of a casual conversation. So unless it's a more formal presentation in a professional meeting, we tend to use many words in Spanish to say pretty much the same thing that we would try to say in English, straight to the point. So Spanish use and language is the first point that I want to make around diversity and the Hispanic culture. The second one is cultural awareness. How can we be more open about the different cultures and not just assume that because you speak Spanish or you come from a Spanish-speaking country, everybody is just about the same. One of the stories that comes to mind is when a very dear colleague took me to a restaurant, to a Mexican restaurant, thinking that I was going to feel very comfortable knowing of my Hispanic heritage. Now, interestingly, and little did he know, I had never ever had Mexican food in my life. So to assume that someone who speaks Spanish will also be very used to eating nachos is probably not the right way to go. But being aware and trying our very best in making sure that our guests are comfortable is the first and most important thing. So don't assume, ask questions. If you don't know, just don't assume that someone likes this or that just because you assume that Hispanic cultures would like that. So ask questions and be open to that and just observe. There may be very different groups that prefer different things. So be open to that experience. The third part is many people love to educate themselves more about learning much more about other cultures. And you can do that formally through taking classes not only on the language but also cultural classes or having cultural experiences where you would visit a country or have a total immersion opportunity where you would learn a lot more about other people. So the most important here is to be open to the experience. So thank you so much for joining me and enjoy. This is Season 1, Episode 5, on diversity and the Hispanic culture. Today my guest is Maverick Linda Lane Gonzalez, who's CEO of Viva Partnership. Welcome. Hi, I'm Dr. Gaby Cora, and I'm here with Linda Lane Gonzalez.
Oh, thank you. I like the way you said that.
CEO of Viva Partnership. Linda, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really look forward to having a chat.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Linda, you've been with Viva for how long?
I started Viva in 1996, so about 15 years.
And what led you to go into that area within advertising, marketing, within the Hispanic community?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I never dreamed that I would be in advertising and marketing. But I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, and in various other places. But San Antonio was home. And then when I was young, around 12, I went to Mexico and lived in Mexico. Went to the prepa there too. And I'd grown up going to Guanajuato, Mexico in the summers because that's where my dad had gone with his family. They are one of the founders of San Antonio. So they were kind of one of those immigrants that went from the U.S. to Mexico.
So your family is one of the true Maverick families.
Yes, I mean, real Maverick. Like, you know, the last name is Maverick. Yes, the Maverick family, and you know, Maverick comes from that, you know, the word Maverick, which means to you know, to lead the pack and never follow, et cetera, comes from my great-great-grandfather, Samuel Augustus Maverick, who went from Virginia to Mexico in the 1830s, or 1820s actually, went to Mexico to seek his fortune. And so he had to learn Spanish, he had to learn how to work within that culture. And the reason that we have this word maverick that we use too much probably by now, but is because he bought a bunch of cattle and a bunch of horses. He had no idea how to be a rancher. He was a lawyer by trade. And so his Jose Antonio, the guy who worked for him, said, you know, boss, it's time to brand the cows and the horses. And he said, oh my gosh, it's barbaric. We can't do that. So he decided to let them roam free. And so every time anybody would see a horse or a cow or a bull without a brand, they would say, oh, it's a maverick. So that's the way that Maverick came into play. But Mexico is always, for us, been very, very special, regardless of coming from originally from the United States. And my grandmother and her grandmother spent a lot of time in Mexico, and from Saltillo, Guanajuato, all the way up through San Antonio. So we're Mexican-American, or American-Mexicans, I guess you could say.
So you were raised in this interesting integrated mix.
Oh, absolutely.
Of going back and forth with both cultures.
And back and forth with language, and back and forth with food. You know, I mean, when we get together as a family, we eat tamales, and arroz y frijoles, and you know, enchiladas, and all of that. So we're very much a mixture. You know, I have cousins Carmelita, and I have cousins Howard. You know, it's quite an interesting mix.
So a true Hispanic Maverick.
Yes, a true Hispanic Maverick. And then I grew up living in Mexico, in Guanajuato. And I lived there from the time that I was 12 until I graduated from high school, you know, at which point I went on and I lived in Brazil. I went to school in Brazil, so I had to add another language there and another culture as well.
So quite a bit of background, mixed background, that gives you all this diversity in working in this area that you so have loved for 25 years.
Because I grew up being open to culture, because I was exposed to so many cultures when I was young. And so when you're open and aware and not afraid, it makes it so much easier to see the world from a different perspective and a broader vision. And you know, I think that the marketing and the advertising and why I went into that, you know, people will say, then how did you get from here to here? Was that I you know, worked for a couple of different companies that, you know, that really wanted just to you know, to speak or communicate with people as if they were all the same. And it was very frustrating when they would talk about Hispanic or even Latin America. You know, Hispanic and Latin America as being the same. I mean, it's completely different. The experiences are different. The culture at the center is much the same. So I wanted to help them understand that consumer better so that they could find some sort of relationship with them and then create a bond.
Over the past 25 years, I'm sure you have seen different ways in which different companies have worked with the Hispanic market. So what could you tell us from what it was like 10 years ago as compared to, or 20 years ago, to 10 years ago to now?
I think that, boy, when I think of the early days, it was a major fight every time that we would go in and speak to a client. Chrysler, for example, one of the first accounts that I worked on. And they really wanted to speak to the Hispanic directly, but they didn't really want to do it in a way that would resonate fully with them, which is then a waste of money, especially if you're spending $500,000 25 years ago or 20 years ago or $1 million. You don't want to just throw your money away. And so Chrysler wanted to just translate all of their ads. And, let's just take the same thing and dub it. There was a lot of dubbing in 25 years ago where you'd have this Anglo guy, speaking, but his mouth, was moving, and it was dubbed in Spanish. So there was a lot of dubbing and a lot of translating. And little by little, as the Hispanic population grew and they started to see some sort of result, some sort of return on their investment, they started to realize that, wow, our ROI could be much better if we did more of what our agency says to do. And so, it's a huge change. I think that the majority of companies have understood that and now are really, trying to understand their consumer better. Within the company, they're trying to hire more Hispanics and work with an agency that really understands the culture. But then there are others that don't. I mean, there was a situation not long ago with a clothing company that that wanted to just take the advertising that they were doing and just translate the ad into Spanish. What didn't work there was that the families that they showed were obviously non-Hispanic. They thought having some brown-headed people would do it, but Hispanic families, they interact with each other so differently. They're very close. Mom and daughter might sit together and hold hands, and dad is close to his son, and everybody cuddles up together, kind of. And American families are different, not worse, not better, but just different. They don't tend to sit so close together, and they don't hold each other. So you can't just translate without Hispanics knowing that it's a translation. So, and also the products. I just have to throw in the products because there are certain products that Hispanics will buy and others that they're just simply not going to be interested in. Hispanic women like to dress nicely, and you have to provide them with their needs. So you have to understand them to sell to them.
There could be an amazing campaign based in the United States, and many companies try to just translate those into Spanish, and they think that the way that they're going to approach them is exactly the same way that they approached it to the U.S. market. What would you say to that?
Well, I think that people have the misconception that by just using language as a differentiator will work, and it's not a question of translation, because it's language and culture are very much intertwined. And so translating sure will communicate some sort of a message, but will it be relevant? Will it resonate with that Hispanic person? Basically, I think probably not, because language is very, it's cold, cut, and dry. But culture, if you mix it up with culture and you really look at it from the Hispanic perspective, you look at, we have a methodology that we use when we look at the start of a marketing campaign called LLT, Lifelong Lifestyle Tendencies. And we look at where that Hispanic consumer is at the point that they encounter that service or that product, etc. For example, you take banking. If you're a recent arrival from Mexico, for example, you've been here 3 years or 2 years or something, and you never had a bank when you were in Mexico, and you don't trust banks because they devalue the peso, and you can't trust them, and I mean banks are not trustworthy in Mexico, so they get here, And everyone's telling them, hey, you know, you need to save. They're saving, but where are they keeping their money? They're not keeping their money in a bank because they don't trust the banks. And so we have to talk to them at where they are here emotionally. And we can speak to them in English, and we can speak to them in Spanish that's translated. But if we speak to them in Spanish, knowing where they come from, and knowing what they've experienced, and knowing how they feel about banking, then we can make a real impact on them. And so the same holds true with so many different products and services. You know, some companies do it right, some companies do it wrong, and you know, it's a big improvement over the past 25 years, of course, but you know, I can think of many, many examples of worst practice.
So let's say that that some companies are a step ahead and they want to focus on the Hispanic and or Latino community. And they now think that you know, approaching their Mexican group is exactly the same as approaching a group from Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. How would you explain to them that both cultures, even though they may be Hispanic, are very different?
Yeah, and that's, it's, you know, there is a way to speak to all Hispanics with one message, with one voice, because there are enough similarities that you can address everyone with one voice. Now, if you have a small budget, that may be the way you have to do it. Now, you may have to look for ways that you can take, you know, the importance of family, the importance of food, the importance of music, the importance of you know, how important the elderly are to the community, etc. And you take that and you can come up with a message that speaks to all. But there are far more differences than there are commonalities. So, but budget also has a lot to do with it, because if you're a Coca-Cola, you're going to speak to Mexicans, and you're going to speak to Puerto Ricans, and you're going to speak to Cubans, you're going to speak to Argentines, and you may even go so deep with the Mexicans that you speak a different way to the Mexicans in Houston than you speak to the Houstons in California, for example. And there's so many differences, and you look at markets as well. Los Angeles and you know, and Miami, for example. You know, in Los Angeles, you have a huge population of Mexican natives that have been born in the U.S., and you have Mexican immigrants as well. And their education level is lower than, for example, the Miami group, because you have in Miami you have the South Americans, you have the Cubans. And most of those folks have come from countries where they've had a political problem, like Cuba, like Argentina and Venezuela. So they come here, many of them are college educated. On the other hand, you go to the other coast, and in Los Angeles, you'll find that, you know, most of them come from the, you know, C-, D socioeconomic pyramid, and they're coming here with no education, no English. You know, they may have had a 6th grade education, and they're laborers. They're more blue collar, and they're workers. So you know, how do you speak to both of those people? People who are more sophisticated in technology. You know, it's you may have to do them differently. You may have to speak in separate voices to them, but with the same message, because you are who you are. You know, Coca-Cola is Coca-Cola.
So let's say you start working with someone, a potential client, and you start looking at the fact that they are going to be working with different subgroups. How would you help them decide, aside from budget? You know, but what would help you decide how to approach the psychology behind that Hispanic culture?
You know, we use, you know, sometimes we help them by taking them through kind of a day in the life. And a day in the life of Jose David, or a day in the life of Maribel. So that they can really, you know, most Americans don't really understand what it is to be Hispanic. And until they really do, then it's very difficult for them to be empathetic and then speak to them and find some sort of a connection. So we kind of take them through this day in the life, and we talk about how Maribel gets up in the morning and she prepares breakfast for the children. You know, it's very different from maybe the American mom who may put some cereal out while she goes to blow dry her hair. The Hispanic mom, regardless of ethnic group, will make sure that her kids have a nice breakfast because it's the most important meal of the day. And then she'll pack their lunches because God forbid that she should, they should buy their lunch in school. That's not going to happen with a Latino mother. And so then she'll get the kids dressed and ready to school. She'll take them. She'll make sure that she left her husband's lunch as well on the counter. And we take them through the entire day. And so that we understand her pain, her happiness, what motivates her, what makes her sad, what worries her, what are her anxieties. And if you take her through that and her activities and you combine them, then that gives that American company or American brand kind of a peephole into their lives. And we do the same with whomever their target audience is. We want to make them real to them. And so a day in the life helps that. Sometimes we take them on immersion tours where we really let them experience it. When you get someone coming in from Kansas City, and we take them to the Sedanos, in Cayo in Miami, for example, there's a lot of shock there, but it's kind of a good shock.
So it's an interesting experience.
Exactly.
Judaism it's a religion, of course, but there's so much of an ethnic part too, because it is a culture too,
right?
In a way. My thinking was that by separating the Hispanic and trying to look at the Hispanic group as an ethnic group, we really are missing on identifying many other ethnic groups. So it looks like it's hanging out
But I
there.
think it's just by sheer number that we're looking at Hispanics that way. Because if you look at, for example, the African American population, they represent 13.1% of our U.S. population. So that's a huge number. So that's why we separate them, because they're really such a huge group, we can't ignore them. And Hispanics are representing now 16% of the population, and Asians 7% of the population. So if we look at Jewish and Polish and Italian, they represent such small percentages that we have to speak to them as a group. There's just, the numbers are just, but when you look at those three growing Hispanic, African American, and Asian groups, we must communicate with them in an effective way, and we want to be relevant to them, and we want to make them feel included. I mean, African Americans have been here for hundreds of years, and there's still this disparity, and which is, I hope that changes in the future, but I think it's going to be around for a while.
From an observation standpoint, what strikes me is, of course, Judaism is a religion, but at the same time, there are so many cultural issues that bring people who are Jewish together. However, I believe that because they've been so integrated within the culture, that it wouldn't, you would probably not think about having a specific campaign for the Jewish, unless you're looking for a specific group, whether it's a more Orthodox group or a group that may be more of the minority within the group, just because they're very integrated within the society. Whereas in the Hispanic group, we're still trying to figure out the best ways in which we can approach this group and make sure that we can offer what they need.
Right. And you have the Jewish population. People are speaking to them separate, but by geography.
Yeah.
I mean, Hallmark Cards has a whole Jewish line. Well, and Hallmark also has a line that's devoted to African Americans, and it's also another line that's devoted to Hispanics. And some are forward thinkers. Some companies are very forward thinking. However, most are not.
Tell me the most common myths that you have to dispel when you go to when you work with U.S.-based companies.
Let's see. One of the top myths right now is that Hispanics are over-indexed in the use of mobile and technology products. Okay, that is true. That is true, but you're only talking about one segment of the Hispanic population. You're really talking about those second generation, in fact, those U.S. Hispanics that are born in this country. They're young. You're talking about teenagers and young adults, and they are very connected because culturally They're very connected with their family and their friends and their life. So yes, they over-index. But it's interesting that communications companies sells that idea by saying that Hispanics, so my gosh, if you're not doing mobile, you're not going to win this group of people. You're
and
not
it's
gonna
just
win their hearts.
a small group.
It's actually it's a the native population of the birth. Hispanics that have been born in the U.S. represent about 67% of the Hispanic population now.
Now, this is an interesting, quick question about this.
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt. So, compare those two groups of the group of Hispanic young adult group born in the States as compared to the U.S. born not of Hispanic origin. What are the differences in their mobile use?
Their mobile use is very similar. Their cultures are very different. These are kids that are, and they may have been born, for example, out of the country, but they came here at a very young age. And so they're very much able to work in both worlds. They feel more comfortable in their Hispanic world, though. But they still know how to deal. They can go to high school, and they're on their phones, and they're connected. Computer technology. They have some of them have tablets, and especially you're getting into the 20s. They want to be the first at everything, and they want to be online all the time. They want to be online or somehow connected all the time. So they're very much like the non-Hispanics in that regard.
Is their technology use any different? Have you found any differences?
Just that they're connecting more and more often with more people.
So are they chatting more, texting more, getting on Facebook?
They're doing it all
social media?
They're doing it all more. And the reason that they're doing it more and with more frequency is because they have been taught from birth to connect. Connection is the most important thing. Family is priority. So they're talking to their mom, and you have a 25, 30-year-old Hispanic male, he's still talking to his mom probably, 2 or 3 times a day. Very different from the non-Hispanic male, who's talking to his mom, please call me at least once a week. That's just unfathomable for a Hispanic mother.
It won't ever happen.
It will never happen. Exactly. So the way that they use technology is very, very similar, but they are connectors, and so they must stay in touch with aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, and of course, mom, dad, mom, mom.
I love it. Tell me about other myths that you've found are frequently, other myths that you've found by working with U.S. companies.
Let's see. Another myth is that if someone is, for example, if a Hispanic is born in this country or they come here at a young age, that automatically they become American. Their culture, their language, they just become American, and they watch American TV and they listen to American radio, English, and that is absolutely untrue. We did a very large study for a greeting card company over a couple of years. It was a 2 to 3 year, actually, big project. And we really wanted to learn how they were using cards, what languages they were buying in, etc. And it was very interesting because we found, and this was a big surprise, that they were buying that Hispanics that were Spanish preferred and Spanish dominant, so those that felt much more comfortable speaking Spanish, were buying about 50-50 English and Spanish. Now, why is that so? Because who are they interacting with? They're interacting with, in their community, with people who speak Spanish and their family and their friends, but they're also buying cards to communicate with their child's teacher, the postman, with other people that speak English. Now, they've had a challenge knowing what's in that card and understanding the words. So that was a problem that we worked to solve, is how to help them buy the right card for the right person when they don't speak the language very well. And then another thing I was going to mention too was that, it's second generation and third generation Hispanics still love watching TV in Spanish. And why is that so? Because it's so culturally relevant to them. If you watch the novelas, first of all, you've probably been a little kid watching novelas with your grandmother and then with your mother, all in the same room, 3 generations, and it just brings back those memories. And you follow a novela, and you may be, your friends may be born in this country and maybe 2nd and 3rd generation. You're all sitting every night on the couch at 7 o'clock to see what's happening in whatever novela is your favorite for the season. And they're very, very popular among the 2nd and 3rd generation because it's culturally so relevant. So it's, as I said before, it's not about language. It is about culture.
So whoever misses the point that the Hispanic culture connects so much is really missing big time.
Yes, absolutely. If it were all black and white, it would be just very easy.
Just very easy.
And you must be genuine. Being authentic is I think, up there as a priority. I've seen some disasters, some real, worst practices. Not long ago, I mean, this is, 2011, I think, I saw a TV spot for an auto insurance company. And it was a Hispanic kid, guy, about 25, it's a kid to me anyway. And he was leaning against his car and he was speaking in English, okay, because they're trying to connect with the Hispanic youth that are 2nd generation. But he was speaking with this accent that was so fake. He was speaking English with a Spanish accent to connect with Hispanics. But it was any Hispanic, regardless of where you are in the language game, will know that that was not authentic. So what they've just done is they have probably lost that customer because of that lack of genuineness. And it's going to take them 3 times as much work to get that customer coming.
Because you can tell right away if there is an accent or not.
Right away.
Or if it's
and it's
genuine
insulting.
or not.
What it says is that I care enough about you to maybe get a few, customers our way, and this will do it and it won't cost any extra money because we don't care about you that much. We care about you enough to, speak to you, but not enough to speak to you in a relevant way.
And this is interesting in terms of that connectivity within the Hispanic culture because of that deep sense of connectivity, whatever's not authentic, whatever connectivity is unreal, people will grab probably even faster than another culture that's not used to that.
Right. I absolutely agree with that. And they're so in tune with who they are that it's instant. It's instant.
One of the things that I've found in terms of having the option to pick up, let's say, an English-speaking card or a Spanish one is the diversity of options. So then if I know that someone is bilingual, I can play with either one.
Exactly. And there's Spanglish cards out there too.
Which are maybe even funnier.
Yes.
Yes. We know many people of Hispanic descent kind of invent their own mix.
Yes, it's very true.
And it's very funny because no conversation ends up being purely one language at all. Is there any other myth that you can think about that surprised you? In working with groups of people or with the companies along your, how many years now that you've been working with?
25.
So it's been a while.
Yes.
It's been a while. Is there anything else that you found is an interesting myth that you need to
dispel?
Yes.
Yes, there probably is. That all Hispanics look alike. This one doesn't look Hispanic. And this one, it's so funny because they have, many, not all, American companies and from CEOs down to account managers, have an idea of who and what this Hispanic consumer looks like. And brown hair, brown skin, etc. And they're completely mistaken because Hispanics can be Asian, Hispanics can be blonde, Hispanics can be anything because it's an ethnicity. It's not a race. It's a compilation of races. So when people hear me speak Spanish, they're like, it's a
surprise.
It's a big surprise because they're like, oh my God, and I always say, cara de gringa, alma hispana, I look like a gringa, but it's a Hispanic. My heart is Hispanic inside here. So and then it comes out in the language and then also in the culture as well, can see that I use my hands a lot.
And you're mentioning something very interesting. There are some people of Hispanic descent who may have been raised in the States, but they feel Hispanic too. Mm-hmm. So their English is perfect, mm-hmm. but their Spanish has a bit of an English accent, but they feel Hispanic too.
Yes, and you see that especially in certain geographic areas. For example, San Antonio has been a Hispanic, well, it used to be part of Mexico. Before that, it was a part of Spain. And so the Mexican community is very large. It makes up almost 52%, I think, of the population of San Antonio. But many of those are fourth and fifth generation Hispanics. And so they may not speak Spanish at all. But their hearts are Hispanic. Their great-grandmothers and their grandmothers were Hispanic and probably spoke some Spanish at home, if not all the time. They still eat the traditional foods of their grandparents and their great-great-grandparents.
The influence of food, of decorations,
yes,
and
color,
construction.
Exactly. You go to San Antonio and you go to certain areas of town, you know, you feel like you're maybe in Mexico in 1870, but with a lot more amenities, like really nice cars and televisions and things like that. Color is just a part of and I can't say it's across the board because I don't think it's all ethnicities are the same, but it's very much part of the Mexican and Central American cultures.
When Hispanic families come to this country, they may have different dreams or expectations. What have you found is most common?
Well, if we're talking about Hispanic immigrants, especially from that Mexican Central American group, they usually don't come as families. Initially, either the husband will come first, or someone is going to come by on their own. And the first thing that they're going to do is they're going to find a community of like people so that they feel comfortable and they get the lowdown on how to maneuver within the U.S. And then they start bringing family. They might bring the kids, the wife, or they find their wife in the neighborhood. And they work very, very hard. It's another misconception on behalf of a lot of Americans is that Hispanics don't work, especially Mexicans and Central Americans. But they work 2-3 jobs, and they're very, they move quite a bit. And the reason they do that, from the American perspective, is that they're not paying their bills, they're moving, which is total fallacy. They're moving because they're starting to make a little more money, so they want to take them to a better neighborhood where they have better schools, and all that family wants, or that the parents of these children want, is to provide a life for these kids that can take them to the next level. They don't expect them to be the president of the United States, and they don't want them to be a Donald Trump. They want them to have a better life than they did and provide and push their children up to the next notch. And that's really the heart and soul of why Hispanic immigrants come here, is that they want a better life for themselves and their family first, as opposed to themselves. And so when you'll see this in kids, in third and fourth generation, talking about how hard their grandparents worked and how hard they have to work. And you see the pride in their eyes, for example, of a second generation Hispanic kid who gets a college degree. He may be the first, or she may be the first to get their high school diploma. Because in Mexico, you only have to go to school through eighth grade. Mm. So getting a high school diploma is a huge accomplishment. Getting a college degree is huge. And so there's a lot of pride in helping them along. So family education to a certain point. What I've also found with education is that they don't believe they need to go too far. And that's very ethnic. A very a certain group of Hispanics believe that. They want their kid to get their high school diploma, but don't go to college. You need to get out and work so you can help the family. On the other hand, if you look at other markets like in Miami and New York, where you have a lot of Cuban community, for example, in South America, Argentines, Venezuelans, Colombians, no, they want something else. They want their kids to go to college. They want their kids to be doctors and engineers and lawyers and business owners.
The professional part.
The professional part. So it's very, it really, as far as looking at a future and how they envision a future for their kids, it's very different by ethnicity.
Okay, now let's bring an eye into the future. Mm-hmm. What do you foresee for the Hispanic community overall, you know, thinking 10, 20, 30, 50 years ahead? And you just gave us a glimpse.
Well, we've already seen the effect of the Latin culture on the non-Hispanic culture. You know, they just came out with a dulce de leche Cheerios. You know, so we have J-Lo and Marc Anthony, and we have, you know, Antonio Banderas, and we have all the music. There's such an interest in you know, all of this, the Spanish hip hop, and so it's really, it's kind of taking the place of just, you know, African American really owned the music world. Well, it's changing a lot. So I think that being Latino, or being connected to that culture is going to be more and more acceptable. In 10 years, I think that we're going to see a lot of change. I think this is the decade of the Hispanic. For sheer numbers, the Hispanic population has to be communicated with and invited to join, because if you look at it, you know, our non-Hispanic population is aging quickly. Who's going to be supporting us? This, you know, boomer generation as it gets older. It will be those minorities.
Now, this is an interesting point, too. You know, we know that from a cultural perspective, the U.S. culture tends to be a certain way with the elders, whereas the Hispanic culture tends to be a bit different. What have you noticed?
Well, you know, we've worked for a few companies that have centered around the elderly. For example, WellCare. They did an excellent job, for example, of really listening to us to better understand their elderly community, especially when it comes to health. But what is so different is that the respect that Hispanics have for the elders. And that goes across the board, from Argentina to Mexico, Dominican Republic. Elders are well respected and taken care of. You know, you're never going to, you know, if you're a Hispanic grandchild or child, you're not going to say, "Mom, Dad, I'm going to put you in a home," because that's just not even thought. I mean, it's not even considered. You know, and I think that with the non-Hispanic population, you talk about moving into assisted housing or assisted living situations, and you know, you might go into a nursing home, and that just won't happen, because how can you possibly let abuelita go live with these strangers when you can take much better care of her at home?
With your food.
With your food and your care and besitos and novelas and all of that. So it's you know, you're taught to respect your elders from, you know, very early on. You know, and many cultures, Latin cultures, for example, won't look at their elders eye to eye, because that's considered rude. So they might lower their you know, their head when they're speaking to their grandparents. You know, remember, I'm sure you've seen it on American TV, is "look me in the eye." You know, that's very, very non-Hispanic. That's very uncomfortable for a Hispanic child. Happens in schools all the time. Kids who are born here, you know, go to school, and they, you know, they don't look their teacher in the eye, because they are supposed to respect her. So that's, you know, another example of you know, how to treat elders.
Well, it's interesting that even in the language, there's a difference. If you're speaking to someone else, you would call someone else who's a little older a certain way as compared to someone else who's younger. In English, we just call everyone you.
Right, exactly.
But in Spanish,
and tú,
right, you have you make the difference. You know, if they look like they're 35 or older, you would never call them just like you, as you would call a friend who's 10, 15, or 20.
Yeah, and sadly that's changing. You know, we're seeing that change, and you know, but it's still, you know, if you're in a big city, you know, you're starting to see a lot of people using the very familiar form of you, which is tú, and I hate to see the usted, you know, go to the wayside, because I think it's a very nice, subtle way of showing respect.
Thank you for watching my show. I hope you enjoyed Linda Lynn Gonzalez's interview as much as I have. And now let's look into ways in which we can apply these lessons learned and make our life even more interesting. So the different things we learned today was, the first one, think about the language. How can you enrich your knowledge of a second language? Let's say it's Spanish. Well, the first thing you can do is listen to this very same interview in its Spanish version. I also have additional interviews in Spanish so that you can check those out. And that may be a way in which you can draw the parallel between the English and the Spanish version, the different styles. So go and learn on your own. The second one is be more open toward watching some other Spanish shows on television, particularly in areas that you're very interested in. So that may be another opportunity there about learning the language. Of course, you can always take formal lessons, and that's one way to go, particularly when you want to learn the grammar. But the second part that is probably even more important than just learning how to speak the language 100% well at all times is becoming more open and more aware about the culture. If you have some interest, if you're curious about learning more about the Hispanic culture, you can always get started with the great food. You can try this by going to different kinds of restaurants. Again, remember, Cuban food is very different from Mexican food, which is very different from Puerto Rican food. There may be some things that are quite similar, but there's many differences too. So be open to that experience. Dance, of course. How about music? Of course. You will have some rhythms that are very particular about many of these cultures. So that cultural awareness, that wanting to learn more about the Hispanic culture will definitely enrich your opportunities. The third part that could help you enrich your opportunities would be around formal education. So not only going back to school if that's what you want to do, particularly if you want to learn more about the language or about the culture itself, but travel can also enrich tons of your opportunities, particularly if you avoid going to mostly American restaurants while you're, for example, in Spain. You may really want to go and try a great Spanish place and or other great areas within the countries that you visit. So avoid trying to do it all American so that you are more open to the experience. That's something to think about. Nothing beats immersion, being in a place for a while, at least a month, I would say, to make a difference. And again, don't assume that because you've been in one place for a month, everybody else is the same. There's plenty to visit, there's plenty to continue to learn and make life interesting. Thank you for joining me and enjoy.